dear members of parliament, dear guests of the Parliament of Ukraine, the floor is given to the Secretary-General, NATO Secretary-General. Please.
Members of the Rada, Excellencies, it is really a great pleasure and a great honor to be here today. And I'm very happy to be back in Ukraine, back in Kiev. And I am deeply honored to address the Rada today, the first NATO Secretary-General ever to do so. And as a member of Parliament for 25 years myself, I fully recognize and fully understand the importance of parliaments in our modern democracies. As the great Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko wrote, "It makes great difference to me that evil folk and wicked men attack our Ukraine, once so free, and rob and plunder it at will. That makes great difference to me." It makes great difference to NATO too. And that is why we have stood with your country since you regained your independence. Today I am joined in Kiev by all members of the North Atlantic Council. We are here to mark the 20th anniversary of our distinctive partnership with Ukraine. Even before we stepped up our cooperation in 2014, we had long been a strong supporter of Ukraine, helping you to strengthen your institutions and armed forces, and to implement critical reforms. We are also marking 20 years of Ukraine's strong support to NATO. Ukraine has taken part in NATO missions and operations around the world, even while facing major threats at home. Training officers in Iraq, patrolling ships in the Mediterranean, and tackling piracy off the coast of Somalia, supporting our resolute support mission in Afghanistan, and with a heavy engineering unit in Kosovo. So we in NATO are really grateful for you in Ukraine, for everything you have done in support of our alliance. Thank you so much. Today, we are here to show solidarity with Ukraine and to underline our support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russia's annexation of Crimea dealt a terrible blow to Ukraine. It also has serious implications for all the free countries of the world. It was the first time since the end of the Second World War that one European country had annexed part of another by force. It undermined the decades of progress that all nations, including Russia, had made to establish a rules-based international order, where borders are respected and where all nations reject the idea that one country should be beholden to another within a sphere of influence. I have said it many times before, but let me say it here in the sovereign parliament of the Ukrainian people. NATO does not and will not recognize Russia's illegal and illegitimate annexation of Crimea. Russia and you know this better than anyone else, is trying to destabilize Ukraine through its support of the militants in the east, its cyber attacks, disinformation, and not least by the presence of Russian forces in eastern Ukraine. This must end. Europe and North America are united in the condemnation of Russia's actions and in their continued support for economic sanctions. Russia must withdraw its forces and military equipment from Ukraine's internationally recognized and sovereign territory. OSCE monitors must be given full and unhindered access to the whole of Ukraine, and the Minsk agreements must be implemented in full by all parties. Only then can the millions who have been displaced or are trapped in the east return to a normal life. Only then can the families torn apart by war be reunited. And only then can Ukraine truly be free. Ukraine is a sovereign nation, and it has the right to choose its own security arrangements. Last month, NATO welcomed Montenegro as the 29th member of our alliance. This shows that NATO's doors remains open. The road to NATO membership is not easy. For those who seek it, it requires dedication and substantial reform. But in the end, membership is a decision for the 29 members of the NATO alliance and for those who wish to join, and for them alone. No one outside has the right to try to intervene or to veto such a process. NATO provides political support to Ukraine, but it also provides practical support. Last year, NATO leaders agreed a comprehensive assistance package to help Ukraine to better defend itself and to implement a wide-ranging reforms. We now have more than 50 people right here in Kiev, all determined to support you on your journey. To strengthen this Parliament's democratic control and oversight over the armed forces. To improve command and control within the military. To increase military education and training and encourage the adoption of NATO standards. To protect your vital energy infrastructure, and to better combat the constant barrage of cyber attacks. These are just some few examples of things that NATO is doing to support Ukraine in your time of need. But while NATO can support, it is for Ukraine to lead. If Ukraine is to truly fulfill its potential, there is much it must do. It must strengthen its institutions, and it must rid itself of the cancer of corruption. Corruption, inertia, and resistance to reform stand in the way of real change and of a secure, prosperous future for the Ukrainian people. You have already made some remarkable progress, but there is still a very long way to go. Clear leadership is needed at every level across Ukrainian society. But more than ever, and more than anywhere, it must come from the President, from the Prime Minister, and from you, the elected representatives of the people. I commend you all on how far you have come, and I encourage you to continue on that journey, to fight against corruption, to strengthen the rule of law, and to bring transparency to all parts of public life. The fighting in the east has led to the loss of many lives, and some 24,000 people have been injured. NATO is supporting the physical and psychological rehabilitation of military personnel injured in the fighting. We have paid for more than 1,700 people to receive training and rehabilitation techniques. NATO funds have helped injured personnel to receive physical rehabilitation, and almost 5,000 to receive psychological rehabilitation to help them cope with the trauma of war. This morning, I met with some of those men, people who have put their country ahead of themselves, who went to the front to fight for freedom, and who paid a terrible price. Their lives will never be the same. But these men were not beaten. They were determined to carry on and to rebuild their lives. And with NATO support, those men will fly to Canada in September to compete in this year's Invictus Games. I wish the Ukrainian team the very best of luck. They and their brothers in arms who lost their lives are true Ukrainian heroes, just like the Heavenly Hundred and all those who demanded freedom during the Euromaidan protests, alongside many of you here in this chamber. This is a time for heroes, and Ukraine needs them more than ever. Not just in the field of battle, but right here in the parliament, in government, in business, and in civil society. Ukraine needs heroes to stand up to all those who seek to stifle its bright future, and to fight corruption wherever and in whatever form it exists. So, members of the Rada, Ukraine needs modern, efficient armed forces. It needs strong, accountable democratic institutions. It needs strong, accountable and democratic leaders. Ukraine needs you to be the best you can be. For 20 years, NATO has stood by Ukraine's side, and NATO will continue to stand with you in the long and difficult years ahead. Thank you so much.
Шановні колеги, але наша зустріч не завершена.
Dear colleagues, but our meeting is not over. We will carry on. Now we'll have questions from representatives of parliamentary committees. Secretary-General wanted to take your questions. These are going to be the Committee of Parliament for Foreign Affairs, Parliamentary Committee for European Integration, and Parliamentary Committee for National Security and Defense. Representatives of those committees will be able to ask questions to the Secretary-General. The first one to speak will be head of the Committee of the Parliament for National Security and Defense, Mr. Serhiy Pashinsky. Thank you very much, Mr. Stoltenberg, for having visited our Parliament. I would like to address you and the ambassadors of NATO. Even though we have cooperation documents signed, documents in place, irrespective of agreements that we have with Russia, in 2014, Russia unleashed an open military aggression against us. And it's only due to the mass heroism of our military, the National Guard, volunteers, border guard servicemen, we did manage to stop this aggression in the east of Ukraine. Paying the price by thousands of lives of our servicemen. Only that stopped the aggressor in his tracks. We keep suffering from this aggression. We are very thankful for the support that we get from NATO, political and technical and otherwise. But I'd like to address you with the following question. Don't you think, Mr. Secretary-General, that the agreement of partnership and cooperation which we have with NATO should be upgraded? Basically, all NATO member countries have blocked opportunities for Ukraine to get necessary military equipment and spare parts. And now the industrial complex is not strong enough to bridge this gap. Please pay attention to that. Thank you. We'll give the floor to Head of the Committee of Parliament for Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Hanna Hopko.
Dear members of North Atlantic Council, dear members of Parliament and Ukrainian citizens, it's a big honor to have you here today. First of all, let me thank you for all your personal efforts and all practical support from NATO to Ukraine. This is crucially important to see the consolidated position of NATO members countries to Ukraine. Today in the morning, during the exhibition in the Arsenal, I stopped by one poster which from Bucharest Summit 2008, when NATO welcomes Ukraine's and Georgia Euro-Atlantic aspiration for membership in NATO. And also, we agreed today that these countries will become members of NATO. Today, we make clear that Ukraine and Georgia on their direct way to membership. I do hope that after almost 9 years that passed from Bucharest summit, when in your Bucharest declaration it was clearly written that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. Today Ukrainian soldiers are protecting also NATO and NATO members from Russian aggression. So actually my very straight questions. Ukraine also seeks or strives for more ambitious partnership. And I hope that this visit, this is a start of a real dialogue about the membership action plan. And also this is the first step for our membership. I think that Russian aggression against Ukraine is not a limited factor for joining for Ukraine to NATO. I think this is extra benefits that Ukrainian army within this 3.5 years of war by everyday practice and countering Russian aggression. So my question is very direct. When you will consider the membership action plan, and I think that Russian aggression is not the limited factor. And actually this is really important for our society because there is a strongest support of this. Thank you.
Дякую. І останнє слово для запитання.
Thank you. Deputy Head of the Parliamentary Committee for European Integration, Maria Ionova. Ms. Ionova, please.
North Atlantic Council. First of all, I would like to thank you for supporting Ukraine in this difficult time, for the awareness of tasks and mission of our country on the borders of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and respectively for understanding the need for effective cooperation between Ukraine and NATO members in the coming years. And of course, we highly appreciate you name a problem as it is. And your public position is really very strong and principled, and we take it as a position of the North Atlantic Council. We are aware that not all member states are unanimous regarding the vision of the NATO's support for Ukraine, as well as regarding the membership perspective. But at the same time, the world is witnessing feats and victories of our nation and its soldiers in the name of common values and principles for all of us. And that is why my questions are, today President of Ukraine made a statement with regard to NATO membership action plan in 2020. Given the plan is not a ticket for membership, shouldn't membership action plan be guaranteed for Ukraine earlier? And my second question is how NATO can help us to fight for liberation of hostages, appealing to Russia Federation, because there are 132 hostages in control by Russians territory Donbass, 10 political hostages in Russian Federation, and 30 Crimea Tatars also. Thank you.
Шановні колеги, дякую за питання.
Dear colleagues, thank you for your questions. We give the floor to the Secretary-General Stoltenberg for answering the questions from the MPs.
On the questions, and let me briefly respond to them. First, to the first question from Mr. Basinski, I would like to say that I will pay, and NATO pays great tribute to all those Ukrainian soldiers who have served, and many have paid the ultimate price in Donbass, fighting the aggression against Ukraine. And that's also the reason why we continue to provide direct support for you, not least in helping you to modernize and strengthen your armed forces, partly by modernizing your defense and security institutions, but also with 10 trust funds which have allocated around 40 million euros for different activities on logistics, on command and control, on medical rehabilitation, and also on cyber defenses. On top of what NATO provides in direct support through the trust funds and through the different programs, of course we also encourage NATO allies to provide support on the bilateral level. So the total support from NATO is partly what NATO as an alliance provides, but also very much what NATO allies provide within bilateral arrangements and bilateral support programs. All of this makes a big difference, and all of this has helped you to modernize and improve the quality of your forces. And I think there is a very strong link between modernizing the armed forces as such, but at the same time highlighting the importance of implementing reforms of your defense and security institutions, including civilian democratic control over the armed forces. This is for NATO two sides of the same coin. Then you asked me about weapons. Well, NATO as an alliance does not possess weapons or equipment. So this is not for NATO as an alliance. But of course, NATO allies have equipment and different weapons. I know that there are talks going on between Ukraine and some NATO allies on this issue, and also discussed it with the President earlier today, the question of weapons based on the bilateral consultations and talks which are going on. Then, Madam Hapko, you asked me, first of all, you referred to the exhibition, and I think the exhibition we inaugurated this morning illustrates that and demonstrates that our partnership has lasted actually for more than 20 years. We are celebrating the distinctive partnership, the 20 years of distinctive partnership today, but actually we had the partnership also before that. And NATO has been there, and especially after 2014, we have significantly stepped up our support, both politically and our practical support. I think actually both the question from you and also from the last speaker, Madam Ionova, was related to membership and the membership issue and the question of map. So I will answer that together. For NATO, it is an absolute and fundamental principle that every nation has the right to choose its own path, including whether it wants to be a member of a security arrangement, an alliance or not. We respect the decision when they decide to be neutral countries or when they decide to try to strive for membership in an alliance, and of course also if a nation decides to strive for membership in NATO. Then it is a decision by 29 allies and the applicant country whether there is going to be membership or not. An important message today from me is that no one else, no other country, no one outside the 28 allies and the applicant country, the country which is striving for membership, has the right to decide on that. What we have seen with Montenegro is that NATO's door is open. We pursue an open door policy. At the same time, what I think that Montenegro has taught us is that it requires a lot of reform, it requires a lot of effort, and it requires that NATO standards are met. So I think that the decision of Ukraine now to focus on reforms, to focus on strengthening your security institutions, to fight corruption, to modernize, that is exactly the right focus. And especially because you are also focusing how can you meet NATO standards, how can you increase interoperability, because all of that is important and good for NATO, good for Ukraine, regardless of membership. Because the more you modernize, the more you succeed in the fight against corruption, the more you are able to meet NATO standards, the more you are able to be interoperable, meaning work together with NATO soldiers, the better it is for Ukraine, even outside NATO, and the better it is for NATO, regardless of whether Ukraine becomes a member of NATO or not later on. But at the same time, it makes you move closer to NATO. And therefore, my message is that be focused on the reform, be focused on meeting NATO standards, be focused on the fight against corruption. That's the best thing you can do, and that's the best thing you can also do to move closer to the NATO alliance. You have the tools, and we have the tools, with the annual national program, with the comprehensive package, to further strengthen our cooperation and to do more together. So we have the frameworks, we have the tools. I think our common challenge is to fill the tools, the comprehensive package, the annual national program, with as much content and as much activities as possible. That's for NATO, but it's also very much up to you and all NATO allies to provide the necessary resources and the contributions to the comprehensive package and our cooperation programs. So once again, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for letting me speak to the Rada, and I really appreciate the very close and good cooperation we have between NATO and Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stoltenberg, for taking the questions from MPs. I'd like to reassure you that the Ukrainian Parliament is very committed to reform and to our NATO membership bid. I'd like to announce that our meeting will continue in a closed format. That's why I invite heads of the committees and parliamentary factions to the conference hall for a joint meeting with the Secretary-General and members of the North Atlantic Council. And the meeting of MPs with the Secretary-General in the plenary hall is adjourned. Thank you.
It makes great difference to NATO too. And that is why we have stood with your country since you regained your independence. Today, I am joined in Kiev by all members of the North Atlantic Council. We are here to mark the 20th anniversary of our distinctive partnership with Ukraine. Even before we stepped up our cooperation in 2014, we had long been a strong supporter of Ukraine, helping you to strengthen your institutions and armed forces, and to implement critical reforms. We are also marking 20 years of Ukraine's strong support to NATO. Ukraine has taken part in NATO missions and operations around the world, even while facing major threats at home. Training officers in Iraq, patrolling ships in the Mediterranean, and tackling piracy off the coast of Somalia, supporting our resolute support mission in Afghanistan, and with a heavy engineering unit in Kosovo. So we in NATO are really grateful for you in Ukraine, for everything you have done in support of our alliance. Thank you so much. Today, we are here to show
dear members of parliament, dear guests of the parliament of Ukraine, the floor is given to the Secretary-General, NATO Secretary-General. Please.
Members of the Rada, Excellencies, it is really a great pleasure and a great honor to be here today. And I'm very happy to show solidarity with Ukraine and to underline our support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russia's annexation of Crimea dealt a terrible blow to Ukraine. It also has serious implications for all the free countries of the world. It was the first time since the end of the Second World War that one European country had annexed part of another by force. It undermined the decades of progress that all nations, including Russia, had made to establish a rules-based international order, where borders are respected and where all nations to be back in Ukraine, back in Kiev. And I am deeply honored to address the Rada today, the first NATO Secretary-General ever to do so. And as a member of Parliament for 25 years myself, I fully recognize and fully understand the importance of parliaments in our modern democracies. As the great Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko wrote, "It makes great difference to me that evil folk and wicked men attack our Ukraine, once so free, and rob and plunder it at will. That makes great difference to me."